I'm here with Katy John Wentz. Is that the right way of saying it?
Yep.
Yep. And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the trans movement as a whole, what led Katy to transition, and when they think it's appropriate to do so. And so just a little bit about yourself first, and what kind of led you to speaking about this.
Okay, so my name is usually enough to get people confused to start with. Katy John is a combination of actually my two birth names, Catherine and Jonathan. I do have a kind of slightly confusing biological sexed history as well. I am XY chromosome male. I had that tested to find out, but that wasn't until much later in life. Earlier in life, the doctors had a couple of hours fun working out what sex I was to start with. I had a minor.
You're actually intersex. You're an intersex.
Well,
person.
This is debatable. I mean, we can jump into the whole intersex purism theories as well. I would say I have. I would be part of the general spectrum of intersex. Some people say not intersex enough. Some people say too much, and the same applies
to your XY. Surely that makes you, like, on paper that would make you intersex, no?
Well, no, I'm XY male. So, okay. So XY male but some of the arguments from the gender critical side is that even if you're intersexed, you're still male or female, which to some extent is true. But does it mean you're a man or a woman? Not necessarily. I have a friend who has an extreme version of the condition that I have a mild version of, which meant their body didn't androgynize at all. So to all intents and purposes, from the outside, they look female. But if you go inside, a lot of it doesn't lead anywhere, so there's no womb. And there was an internal testy, but they didn't realize any of that until they were 19. And by then they'd been raised female, thought they were female, everything about them was female, but didn't have a period. And that was one of the first giveaways in that sense. Now, they had that version that they looked female, but had an XY template they didn't realize until later. I had an XY template that I didn't realize till later, but I obviously grew up as a boy and always thought I was a boy. Well, no, that's not true. Always.
Wait, is female not XX? I'm confused. Sorry.
Yeah, so XX is female, XY is male. It's the broken Y bit, as we call it, is the male, or the presence of another aspect in the genetic spectrum that makes us male and how we respond to testosterone. So my body, I was raised a boy, I am a boy, I am male. I have no problem saying that. Okay. But during my teens, I had no evidence of male puberty. And I'd already had a minor op on my genitals when I was 5, because it was only a minor aspect to full formation, but it was a present one, and one that my dad and my granddad had very early in life as well. So there was a congenital kind of inheritance of a lack of male masculinization of the body in some ways, very minor. And that's why I don't want to claim the title intersex, but I would say it's an intersex condition, or it's a endocrine hormonal condition. So I didn't get a male puberty to my last term of school, and I was in an all-boys school. So I didn't act or have that development of muscle, facial hair, voice breaking at all at school. So I had, occasionally got bullied, etc. Not just occasionally. But I was the smallest kid in my year, and the year below that, and the year below that, sort of thing. So I ended up for 7 years under pediatricians in a human growth hormone clinic, in fact, with the idea that they would eventually give me growth hormone because I wasn't growing. I wasn't developing, and that was affecting other medical issues I had at the time. So it was that medical exploration as a teenager that made me feel very much that I didn't fit with my male peers. And yet even before I got there, I'd say in my upper junior school, I was already from the ages of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, already questioning what were boys like, why I didn't feel like one, but I didn't feel like a girl. So it isn't that kind of stereotyped female attractive male.
Now it is more so, but it's easier for people to direct any feelings like that directly towards it, because there's something in the mainstream that tells them this is what it is. Whereas the feeling of just not fitting in is very different. It's like a different sort of, I think a lot of people take that feeling of not fitting in now and immediately put it to something gendered.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the questions we can get to later, for sure, because I think that is even more prominent now, because now they're not fitting in. You've almost got role models of ways to be if you don't fit in, and so there's those suggest. But when I was obviously growing up, I'm 58, so therefore it's out there on the internet now. I'm old, so go back 30, 40 years, and there was no internet. So the only way there was definitely no social media, and nor was there an internet. Internet was kind of being built while I was at university, sort of thing. And so I didn't have access to any of that. The only way I could find out even about trans stuff was in some very dodgy magazines. I didn't really have access to information. I had no role models. There were no TV role models at the time. I didn't know a single gay person at school, let alone a trans person. There was none of that surrounding environment. And yet I still had these thoughts from a young age that I didn't fit. Who was I? What is gender? And the first time in school, they go, girls sit here, boys sit here, girls do that, boys do that. My head's going, why? And it wasn't because I wanted to play with what the girls were playing with. In part, there was a socialization that I wanted to play with the girls, but doing some of the boy things, if that makes sense. So some of my best friends were the girls who played football or the girls who climbed trees, not the girls who did Cindy and Barbie, because I was an action man. I played with Action Man, but I also didn't like sports. So there's a lot of too much gender stereotyping that went on. If there's no place to explore it, it does mess you up a bit.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's a lot that's I think that's what's really confusing about this whole thing is there's this mix of everyone needs to be what they are and just be who they are, but also this is for girls and this is for boys, and we can clearly gender and decide who someone is based on the color of their school bag. It's like it's this absurd kind of duality to it all.
Yeah, the very thing we're trying to fix, we're also enforcing. And I think a lot. In hindsight, if I was to say, if trans activism had gone down a different path, it's a bit too late for that now, but I wish they had, say 10 years ago, gone down the path of, and as you see on the placards, trans women are women, which I've never held a placard up for. I've said trans women are trans, or trans women are trans women, and I have no problem holding that placard up. I usually just prefer to say trans women are trans. It's literally a whitish statement.
By the way, I completely agree with that. I think that the problem is that people are trying to get the title of woman where it should be trans women is fine. It should be its own individual thing.
Or even just, I'm quite comfortable with trans being this alternative kind of crossover, species area. Trans women are trans, and we don't even know what that means. We're still in the infancy of some of the brain studies of whether or not there's any kind of brain proof for this. It's in such small areas of the brain, and there's not enough proof. And the best way to prove it is after you're dead, which is a bit difficult.
Oh, sorry. Do you know much about the brain studies? Because I looked into them, and they do seem like there's something to indicate there's a difference, but that's pretty much all we've got so far, right?
Yeah, and it's mainly out of Netherlands, and it's a very small parts of the brain. I'm fascinated by neuroscience, and I remember going to a Women of the World event, one of Jude Kelly's events, and there was a neuroscience talk there, and then also at another place I followed this neuroscientist after that because of that. And I have a whole, you see, I like books, but I have a whole collection over there of brain books, and there are fights within feminists, let alone genderists in that sense, as to whether there is such a thing as a female brain and a male brain. And what there is definitely an androgenization, a testosteronization of the brain. There is also then environmental development of the brain. If you're already going to stereotype people and they teach them certain things, if you're only going to teach the boys mechanics and car stuff, they're going to be more inclined towards that, and they're going to have brains that are better at those kind of mechanical things, spatial awareness stuff. And if you're only going to kind of teach the girls so-called soft skills, they're going to be better at emotional fluency, verbal fluency, and everything else like that. So we're reinforcing the so-called brain differences if they even exist. That said, the brains are indifferentiated initially in the womb, but then there is a kind of an androgen brain shower in the womb, if you like, and that does begin some of the differentiation. There's also the terrible twos where you get a bit of another hormone delivery, and then you get a puberty delivery. And mine, as I say, was very late. So I was going through puberty the last term of school and the first year and a half of university, and that's when I finally began to grow. But by then I'm so out of time, I don't fit with anyone in that sense. And then the only models around for you are girls and boys. So if I'm feeling like I don't fit in boy, and the only models they're supplying in the world are girl or boy, then my brain, in part, social brain, is thinking, well, maybe I'm in the other category. So And if I don't feel like a sheep, I think, well, the only option is a goat. But no one told me there's a third option out there, and I could be some other animal, So that's why I don't like the binary stereotype and gender roles as well.
No, I completely agree that this the brain thing's really interesting, because the problem with all the theories of mind, is that we can't possibly tell if it's causation or correlation. It's almost impossible to actually know. It almost comes down to, in all of them, whether it's gender identity, Blanchard's, all of them, you can't tell whether it's a causation or a correlation, and there's no way to actually prove that. They tend to lean towards, we can do it through observable behaviors, but those observable behaviors always are filtered through a correlation lens, not a causation lens. It's the same with brain theories, because I don't know how you would. I don't know if it would even be possible to do a study on those sort of things without literally raising humans in a sterile environment, which I'm not sure you'd be allowed to do.
And it's exactly the same issue with, say, puberty blockers. How do you do a proper study on them unless you actually let half the people have puberty blockers and half of them not have it? The half that don't have it or get placebo, there's no way you could do a placebo, because you could see the difference. And people who didn't get it would probably sue you for not being allowed to get it. And now we have this kind of, I would say, you've got causation and correlation. And, my first degree studies were statistics alongside economics. So I remember when we used to talk about, I think it was at school, that if you give teachers a pay rise, there will be an increase in whiskey sales. Therefore, all teachers are alcoholics. No, but that's not getting statistics. But what we have is, I think, a confirmation bias almost around trans, that if someone questions gender, by definition, they must be trans. No, I think everyone should go around questioning gender, and very few people should go through transition, because it's hard and it doesn't necessarily make life easier. And I think it should be hard thought through. I mean, that's my kind of strong opinion on that, for which I'm berated by people from my so-called own community.
No, I think you talk a lot of sense. I mean, I was reading the definition of transgender the other day, and something really stood out to me, where it said that it was definition of gender dysphoria, and it said that it's not inherent to being transgender. And I was like, if that's true, then why isn't the inverse also true? Why? It's kind of like this nebulous. There's no sort of exact definition to what this thing means. It's very, very nebulous. So maybe we could speak about a little bit. What do you think that people get wrong most about trans?
It's kind of a little bit what we were just talking about, but the idea that we're all the same, that all trans people are going down this pre-programmed route, that we're running into it with open arms, banging on the doors of doctors saying, I have to be a woman, I want a woman, and these are the reasons why, that we're all sex or genitalia or femininity obsessed, I have to have this kind of thing, or that we're all, or at the same time, that we're all secretly gay. If we're all secretly gay, why would we really want female body parts? Because that's kind of the opposite. Or that we're all victims in our past of abuse, and the reason we're doing it is because we've had that messed up about ourselves, or that we're all abusive, or fetishists in that sense. It's the very fact that these kind of pejoratives are thrown around about us, that we're all seen to be kind of a homogenous group of perverted men, and always again that trans men are forgotten in the discussion, or girls who have a gender dysphoric feeling around being female, if it's another way of putting it. Are they the same causes for both groups? Do each sex have completely different causes? I think there are plenty of causes within each group, and it's not just one cause for both. So I think the thing that I would love for people to be seen as individuals, and to discover the actual, dysphoria is hell. But equally, I think there's a degree to which it's a subset of body dysmorphia as much as gender dysphoria. And there are people who go through, I've talked to kind of female friends and said, I think I have gender dysphoria. I said, how do you mean? I said, well, when I look in the mirror, I hate the idea of myself as a female. And I said, well, all you've got to do is turn on, Instagram, the mirror, or a clothing catalog to suddenly realize the perceptions and preferences and descriptions, etc., of women are enough to make every woman feel like not a failure, but you know what I mean? It's going to give everyone a body disconfidence. And when that body disconfidence is only expressed in the two-gendered way, then it makes it harder. If we can recognize there's diversity within a gender, I think a fewer number of people would transition completely. I still think there is a strong, I don't think it's always the answer. But it's that idea, I think, that we're all the same, as opposed to seeing individual journeys, individual causes, and individual dilemmas. And human dilemmas. Where's the compassion and empathy gone? You can hate what I appear to stand for. You can hate what I did to myself. But can you really still hate the person? It's the hate that gets beyond it that annoys me.
I think that what annoys me the most is all the theories of trans, and I've really been looking into them a lot, is they tend to end up viewing everyone as a monolith. And it doesn't feel like I really stand by what I was saying at the beginning before, when I didn't know a whole lot about all the theories and everything, but I think I was right where I said that it's pretty much every individual person has an individual reason for doing it.
Yeah.
And there might be broadly some categories that you can put them in, but then, there's broadly the category that you can put everyone into homosexual and heterosexual. And that doesn't tell us anything about as to why anyone does anything. It just tells them, there's a binary. And even that is arguably not really a binary.
And in the early days of transition, as I say, because I transitioned nearly 20 years ago, nearly in that sense, when I was coming out, the way you do, again, before social media, but definitely in the age of the internet, you go onto an internet bulletin board, message board, and you could be told, even however you felt individually, you would be told there's a particular way you need to describe yourself to your psychiatrist in order to get to the transition. So we tended to conform to a particular set of answers to the questions from our first interviews with psychiatrists, because we all knew what the reasons for rejection were. And because we wanted this thing, so we thought it would kind of cure us or save us or make us happier, we were ending up conforming to a set. And then when the studies are done, it shows that everyone is the same, because we've all pretended to conform to it in order to get what we wanted. So the gatekeeping produced its own generalizations.
Well, no, I that's what I realized as well by looking at so the Blanchard AGP theory and stuff like that. When he says, like, anytime my data is someone's arguing my data, I just assume they're lying. It's basically the thing, and it's like, but it's like, well, then who's to say that everyone isn't lying all the time? If this is all based on self-reporting, it doesn't, like, we can't possibly know anything's true.
And good science is breaking a theory apart, not denying the theory at all. It's building upon, tweaking, revising, and again, this. If we want to jump to AGP now, anyway,
we can jump. We'll be jumping back and forth, but
okay, we'll tear it apart or build it up.
The Blanchard theory. We can go there first. It kind of makes sense, actually.
Okay, I mean, again, this is back to binary and boxing everything again. But the idea that AGP, orthogonophilia, Blanchard's theory is either true or not true, to me is the wrong question. It's like, how much of it is true? How much of it applies? Are there improvements upon it? It is one theory among many. How do you prove or disprove it, etc.? So it's when I encounter, say, gender critical voices in discussions, and they basically say all trans are AGP, or or Katy, if they even call me that, they actually just yell, "You're an orthogynophile," and it's like that, and it's used as an insult rather than even a theory. And then on the trans side, you get there's no such thing as AGP. Blanchard was rubbish at his job. And so you've got these two extremes. And again, no one will look at the possibility that there's some truth, that it's true of some people, that there's nuance, that there are improvements, etc. It's strongly based around the idea that deep down it's based only really on the trans women side. And it's based around the idea that some of them deep down are basically gay, and some of them deep down basically are attracted heterosexual, but instead of being attracted externally to women, they're attracted internally to themselves as a woman. And you could go into Freud and Jung as to whether that woman is their mother. It's a whole extra layer, which might explain some of the dress sense of some of the older ones. I'm trans, I'm allowed to make that joke, and we all used to make that joke.
Yeah, but also I do notice when people point out, this person looks like their partner, therefore AGP, there's also a part of me that goes, but surely that's just the only woman that's near them, so they're going to imprint on the person. There's all, this is what I mean by correlation without causation.
It's imprinting is an interesting concept in itself, because in nature you do get imprinting. If you raise a duckling with a bunch of bunny rabbits, it's going to imprint and can get confused that it's a bunny rabbit. Obviously it isn't, but it's said of the human species that we're one of the few kind of animals that can look in a mirror and recognize ourselves, and animals don't. I swear that can't be true, because although I saw my cat looking in the pond the other day, and it ran backwards. Oh my god, there's another cat. Yeah. So maybe we should ban mirrors and we would get rid of trans. I don't know. But it would give it a lot of problems. But it's what we see, and whether there's a break with that internally is possibly a reason amongst it. I think Blanchard's theory doesn't allow for properly for, say, bisexuality and asexuality, because it's strongly based around there's a sexuality or an attraction to it. And I've spoken, as I say, to female friends who've spoken around the positive idea of looking in a mirror. I see myself in a mirror, oh my god, you look great today. I like you. And women, does that make me an AGP because I fancy myself in the mirror?
But then that's a normal. Then the other problem is, depending on the theory of mind you come from, is that's a normal female thought. It all depends on what your basic starting premise is, whether Blanchard's theory makes sense or not. It fits all within the box, but you have to start within the basic. You have to start within his framework of everything in order for his theory to make sense.
That makes sense. In other words, if you start within a two-dimensional world, everything that you explain will fit the two-dimensional world.
Yes.
What's that thing? Flatland. But if you only know two-dimension, then experiencing three-dimension will seem, wait, what's that? That's extraterrestrial. That's alien to me. So I think the whole kind of Blanchard aspect, it's still, as I say, combined with brain theory and neuroscience, it's still very much in its infancy. I would say we're still in the infancy of psychotherapy. It may be 150 years old, aspects of it, but parts of it are also still in their infancy. We get one theory that lasts a decade or so, then a counter theory, then a synthesis theory. And we're still going back and forth looking at various theories of not only mind, but theories of treatment of the mind. And I don't think we're still there. The crossover also between, say, sexuality, gender, and sex, I think is real, but it's wibbly wobbly. So if you will remember school days of Venn diagrams, 3 circles that interlock. And if you imagine the interlocking point, there is a part of who we are and how we navigate ourselves that is about sex, that is about gender, that is about sexuality, and some of that is hormonal as much as anything else as well. We've looked at hormonal studies of, amongst other things, gay men, bi people, and all kinds of things to look at hormonal levels. But unless we've done those levels throughout their lives, we've got enough other control studies, it's very hard to tell. But there are some studies that show, for example, gay men, rather than being this kind of effeminate descriptor, are actually have higher levels of testosterone than straight men. Which surprises the straight men, because the idea of saying that, because the way we used to kind of diss gay men of old was effeminacy, and then other people have actually looked at the idea that effeminacy is actually a performance. It's a way of almost outing yourself to find other gay people, as much as it's actually an identity. And I think actually identity is one of the biggest issues. If we removed identity from the whole thing completely, this whole idea of finding yourself, finding your label, finding your identity. I mean, I remember 15 odd years ago loving going onto Tumblr to look at the MOGI, minority orientations, gender, intersex kind of identities, flags and everything, in its early days, when there was like, there's 100 identities. Now it's like 400, 500, 600, and there's a flag for everyone.
Calculation, and it's technically like 700 trillion or something, if you count all of the colors and all of the words and all of the.
What I love about it is its creativity, and if it was allowed to run full freedom, it should eventually lead to individuality. In other words,
I mean, that kind of seems like where they're going to, with all of every gender is a color, everything is kind of feels like eventually you'll get to the point where every individual is a individual thing. Like I actually agree with you there. I think that eventually, the logical endpoint of that is individuality.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then you can wave a white flag with no colours on it, and then I surrender for one. Peace, and also this flag is me. You know, it's a snowy day, and that's how I feel today. But the whole point being, I am me, and I am no more like another person or less like another person than the next person. I say there's as much diversity within trans lives or anti-trans lives as there is this conformity. There's as much kind of hate and vitriol that comes out of anti gender critical perf camps to say that they're all the same as much as they say that we're all the same. I think again the move to individuality, the move to see people as human, it would be a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. So why do you think we see kind of a rise in transition in young people?
I think it's, again, so as I was saying earlier, when I was growing up, there was no internet, there was no material, there were no books placed in schools about trans people, gay penguins, whatever it was, you know, so not all of that was alien to me. What we have now, I think, is information, which is good. We have affirmation, which I think is bad, with an asterisk on it. And that has led to greater incidence and prevalence. I think the incidence may have always been there. The prevalence is more likely to be there now because of the affirmation. I think there have always been people, and one of the things I did a couple of lectures as guest lectures at a university many years ago now, and I joke I wouldn't call it this now because I used to call it Around the World in 80 Genders, but you know, probably around the same time that Facebook did accidentally declare 73 genders or something. But I think I actually was doing this talk before that. Now I wouldn't use that title because it was just like putting it up fuel to the fire in that sense. But what I meant by that was an exploration of the world and how it did gender, and I was looking at both history and geography. And I went all the way back to the ancient Egyptians, and I went around different cultures, indigenous groups, and everyone for centuries has had gender outsiders, if you want to call them that. And some cultures would expel those individuals as immoral or unholy in some way. Others would almost worship those individuals as you are the epitome of the combination of masculinity and femininity. And so some would worship two-spirit cultures, some would expel kind of two-gendered cultures, or whatever you want to call it. So there's always been a presence of people who defy stereotypes and or have a psychological or spiritual identity that is beyond those stereotypes. And because they have always existed, I think there has always been an incidence. Whether or not the current prevalence has been inflated or over-affirmed, or has the level always been there and it's just now safer and more comfortable and communicated to be out? I don't think it's that. I used to say that 10 years ago, but the level of incidence has got even, the level of prevalence has got even bigger now. So I'm reluctant to say that increase is down to just better information. I do think that, and we know that the number of, you know, desisters and detransers is growing as well. Which is not surprising. If the number of people becoming trans is growing, then the number of both. The question is the percentage the same? And I've met enough people whose stories I absolutely respect, you know, detransing and desisting, then yeah, in hindsight, you shouldn't have. So what should we have done to prevent that? And therefore, there must be some over-affirmation in the process.
For me, it was, I was obviously going through a mental breakdown, and I was instantly gravitated towards that was the right choice when I shouldn't have been. It wasn't. It clearly wasn't. It was, I should have been, the mental professional should have noticed that I was going through something else. And I think I worry that that's a lot of the instances that are happening is someone's going through something quite serious, and then people jump to that. And even over a long amount of time, they're still, you know, they're not necessarily doing the waiting list as they're supposed to, where they really check. They're just ticking the boxes. Do you still feel like you're a woman? Yes. Okay. See you next week. Like, it feels like that's kind of, even with the longer time, all they're doing is ticking boxes rather than actually interviewing people and actually kind of checking.
Yeah, I mean, when I came out, which is about 19 years ago, and started to see psychiatrists, even then, This is also, there is an aspect to which the statistical increase is slightly skewed by early reporting was underreporting, and now there's kind of, we might say, over-reporting because there's too many people in the system, some of whom may not be trans, you might say. So I think there's a bit of over-reporting now, and there was under-reporting earlier. So I think the actual rate of increase is not as big as it seems. But back when the NHS was recording that there was like 1 in 10,000, 1 in 50,000 people who were trans in 20 years ago, where I live in Norwich, I had the local data and got it, and the figure was more like 1 in 100. So it was out by a factor of 10 to 100 already 20 years ago, because my psychiatrist said, "Oh yeah, I see 70 new trans people a year." And so I got the data, being a former statistician in that sense, I got the data for the number of, adult males in the county, in the catchment area, and looked at the figures. And it was, even then it was closer to 1 in 100, 1 in 200. So the idea that it's now kind of like 1 in 50 or more or whatever, the increase is not as big as people think, but it is definitely there. I think there's multiple aspects to that, as I say, the increased reporting, the increased prevalence in that sense. I do think social media plays a part, which we can dip into in a moment. But I think the other aspect is, again, people are reluctant to talk about it, we talked about earlier about sex, gender, and sexuality being intersectional. There's this fourth area of intersectionality with all of them, which is kind of neurodiversity, which in its loosest term means everybody has a different brain, which is why any brain study is ludicrous. It's only going to amalgamate averages. But what we mean by that now, I guess, in terms of autism through to ADHD, that kind of spectrum or spectra is, when I was working with, I used to work with youth who were considering transition from their teens to their early 20s, and then I ended up setting up a parental support group for those who had gender questioning teens and 20s. It's often put out there that it was an affirmation group. It was the opposite. Well, not the opposite. It was a space that allowed parents to question their children's identity and allowed them to misgender them in a safe space for the parents to doubt and to say, and in that group, I can tell you every single kid that they were describing was also autistic spectrum or ADHD or some neurodiverse or what is sometimes defined as a personality disorder. Every one of them was in that spectrum too. It wasn't even the idea that it's 40% of them. It was nearly 100%. So amongst younger people coming out, there was this extra dimension, which is also another dimension that was also underdiagnosed in the past. Whether it's being overdiagnosed is another matter, but the intersection with neurodiversity, which in an ideal world, in a utopian world, the very fact that people who are neurodiverse are actually less likely to get the gender stereotype norms and rules of life and more likely to reject them because they just don't get them, does not compute. Why, actually gives them a freedom. But if freedom is interpreted as, oh, you must now be trans, then you're not giving them freedom, you're giving them a third box. Instead of male stereotype, female stereotype, hey, you can have a trans stereotype, join that box and you'll be fine. How about be a human being, some of whom might need to do things, express themselves in different ways, maybe even change their bodies and hormones to be happier, but otherwise be you, but take a long time finding out what you is.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. So what's your view on that with, like, I guess, trans kids and stuff? You think, do you think kind of the wait and see sort of grow up a bit first? I mean, I guess that's my question actually, which is when do you think is the right time for someone to be to transition?
The stupid answer would be when it is the right time, and it's very often you never find that out. So I guess so again, my own research around this has been around the fact that I know that I'm an outlier because my hormonal puberty came at aged 18 to 19 and a half sort of thing, whereas the average person, it's for girls because of nutrition and various other health aspects, it's getting younger, but like 9 to 13 for boys, it's like 11, 12 to 15, 16, something like that, or whatever the numbers are. But when we're getting that hormonal rush, So we're getting that period of life where we are a little bit somewhat led by our hormones. We don't really also get the aspect of brain development that some people call executive function, others call the prefrontal cortex, you might say. That aspect of, I wouldn't entirely call it rational, but the aspect of outward thinking and being able to see beyond your inner emotions and feelings. And so there's, if you take the average of puberty, say it's 13, and the average of prefrontal cortex formation and maturing is around, say, 23-ish, then you're talking about a 10-year gap where we're led by our hormones, which is a dangerous thing for everything. That's when you accidentally get pregnant. It's when you accidentally get trans. So if you want to see if you want to deter teenage pregnancies, you want to kind of deter teenage trans in the same reason that you're probably going to change the mind by the time you're 23. And the other aspect we've got now that we also know that those who are on the ADHD spectrum, particularly, less so the autistic spectrum, the executive function prefrontal cortex can form even later into your early 30s. That as someone who's ADHD and bipolar, I would probably say that my kind of executive function is still waiting to form at 58. But the point being that rational, more rational center of our brain that is able to look at everything and go, oh, you know what? And I remember being at a free speech conference and hearing a girl say that she was now 18, 19, whatever, but when she was a teenager going through puberty with quite strong early breast development and the observation of boys and the way they sexually objectified her and the way she felt about her body meant that she initially thought, oh, maybe I'm trans, and if I bind, then it will all go away and no one will notice and all the rest of it. But in the end, what she did is she had a breast reduction, not a double mastectomy, and that solved it for her. You could say you could blind all the men and that would equally solve it, so they weren't looking at her. But we shouldn't change our bodies to stop everyone looking at us in certain ways. But if you had that create, anyway, the point being, for some people, that changing the body dysmorphia rather than the gender dysphoria, that solved it, and it meant she didn't need it. So if you're offering someone a trans solution to something that's an evolving problem that we still don't know entirely the cause or how it's going to develop or whether it's just going to go away naturally, I think you need to recognize that the 8 to 10 year time frame between hormones and brains there is a necessary window of observation and a necessary window for delay. However, if at 23, if you're not, say, neurodiverse, or in your late 20s, younger 30s, if you are neurodiverse, if it's been persistent for like 20 odd years by then hindsight would say, yeah, it would have been nice to transition earlier. But I've changed my mind on puberty blockers. I'm now anti them. I see lots of problems with them. They're a confirmation bias, and they also prevent actual regular brain development and physical development that may even be necessary to fully transition later in life anyway.
Exactly. It's on a functional level. A lot of the surgery is about getting too graphic, that you do need, if you're going to go through some of the bottom surgeries, you need to have gone through male puberty. You need
to have the material. You also may not develop a full-blown sexuality if you prevent hormone development, and you also don't develop some of the brain maturation. So I think it's a whole area for which we do not know fully the risks. Some of the risks are on paper. We don't actually know them because we've never gone through what would have happened. And I don't think you can do a true control experiment.
That's the problem. You have a human in a sterile environment and another human in a sterile environment, and you can't do that sort of stuff with humans. It's impossible.
And ever since we created hormone therapy, I think it was taken from equine urine in the 1940s or something originally. So but once we had developed the possibility of cross-sex hormones and then subsequently puberty blockers, even if both were created for different reasons, once they were available, it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle once it's out. And now we have the option. That option does need a degree of, not sensible control, but I guess I do mean sensible control, if and when this is right, and it needs to be very well thought through. I remember standing up at in 2012 at a transgender conference that was about the depathologization of trans, which is the year that Argentina went down the first route of saying you don't need medical gatekeepers anymore. And I was standing up as a trans person with the psychiatrist to say, you do need medical gatekeepers. And I was almost booed by trans people because they said, no, we don't need gatekeepers. We know our own minds. Really? Have you ever talked to your younger self and realized, well, but these were all young people, so they didn't have a younger self at that point. But when you're 35, 45, 55, and you look back at all your various younger selves, I have a problem thinking about what I did last night, usually, let alone last decade, thinking, oh my God, letter to me last night, as opposed to letter to my younger self. That phrase, I know my own mind, rubbish. You know what?
No, actually, that's completely true. The amount of things that I cringe about, I'm only 30 now, but the amount of things I cringe about that I did when I was younger.
You've got plenty of more you'll live to regret. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's going to get even worse. But I'll do it in 2 years. But the amount of things that I did in my 20s, that it's just now, I'm just like, oh my God, if that person was driving and made the decisions for me now, I would be kind of pissed off. Yeah. But actually, we've covered most of the questions anyway, so I'll jump to the last one, which is, what if you could say one thing to your younger self, what would it be?
I guess that is exactly that appropriate thing. Letter to my younger self. Yes, letter to my yesterday self. It may not be what you expect. There's two things I would say. One, ironically, I would actually say I would become trans at a younger age. I would do it sooner, but not for the reasons I thought I did it for when I did do it. I would do it because part of me in hindsight, actually, it was less about becoming female, which I don't even subscribe to anymore. So when people say you're a trans woman, I go, no, I'm a trans person. And that's not necessarily because I use the other language, say non-binary. I don't mind whether people use the language or not. I'm a human being who has chosen to modify their body, and it doesn't make me a woman, but it did give me gender dysphoric relief. It has gone, it did go, it worked. And I tried therapy, conversion therapy, psychotherapy, psychiatrist, psychologist, everything else first in many respects. I even tried sex workshops in California. But
that sounds very strange. Sorry, it's like you
I kind of said to myself, if you're going to be trans, you need to try everything out first to see whether.
I hope you don't mind me saying, but I interviewed Buck Angel the other day, and it's a very similar point of view. It is, really, really fantastic. It's a very logical point of view on it, which is very much grounded in reality. It makes sense.
So my psychiatrist, who was actually my ex-wife's boss, because she was a psychiatrist, which probably didn't help either. But my psychiatrist said I was the most reluctant trans he'd ever met, because I tried everything else to get rid of it first. I would go to therapists and think, I think I'm trans. How do I stop it? And I went on a easily 10-year plus journey to try and remove it. So in hindsight, I would say, okay, well, I've done the journey now and found out that this was a solution for me. If there were other solutions, I hadn't yet found them. Maybe I didn't try them for long enough. I don't know. But I say in hindsight, I'd probably write to myself, be brave, be yourself. Don't waste life. Get on with it sooner. But I would also probably say to myself, don't join the movement. Don't join the movement, because that can reinforce who you are without you actually discovering who you are. It will reinforce who you appear to be, in other words. And I would say by that, don't join the movement if it polices who you are. And if it polices who you are and what you say and how you dress. I was told, even as a trans person, Katy, you're letting the side down, do more makeup, do more skirts. I don't do any of those things. I still do pockets. I want jeans,
functionality.
There wasn't as much free. The actual movement of trans in some of the versions of it that I encountered were as restrictive as boy and girl gender stereotypes. So I would say, don't join the movement if it polices who you are and what you say, as much as the very movement you're rebelling against and resisting. If you're just going from male stereotype or female stereotype into trans stereotype, you're still kind of losing. And I guess I would probably say the things we need to do is, that whole campaign, let clothes be clothes, let toys be toys, let boys be boys, but whatever. But being a boy means anything and everything. Let girls be girls, but anything. I would say let kids be kids, let teens be teens, let adults do what they want, because adults are adults and all the consequences are on you as an adult to actually do it. I do believe to some extent that it is an adult decision, but we go through child and teen crises and we shouldn't really affirm them. We should try and create a space for exploration that isn't affirmation, including therapy. But as adults, we should be allowed to make adult decisions. We're allowed to, get tattoos, do all kinds of things to our bodies that other people would be shy of when they were younger. But as adults, we should be allowed to make those decisions. But I think also that some of those adult decisions are a luxury. If you're living in a war zone, you're going to be worried about trying to stay alive. And, the therapeutic world of people in personal crises, they're not the same as the crises of existential, not even existential rather, but actual existence versus existential existence, which, but in other words, I think we have it's a first world, liberal world luxury to even be engaging with this degree of introspection and to have the freedom to then act on it. And I think that's something we've created. But I would also just say to everyone, really, and I hate the idea because we always get, trashed down upon for saying just be kind. So I wouldn't just say just be kind. I would say just be humankind. Again, recognize that we're all humans, that we're all individuals. We have gone on those individual journeys. We've got those there's a lot behind everything that you don't realize because you don't ask the questions, you don't lean into the individual, you don't look for the empathy. You can still have empathy towards someone and still critique the apparent ideology, and we should always critique also the impact of ideologies on others, which is why I think I should have the freedom to be an individual, but my freedom doesn't actually necessarily gain me access to others, individuals, or the spaces they have defined. So I think those are things that need to be, negotiated and discussed rather than, your banner gets you entry.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so finally, where can people find you? Where can people kind of look you up and stuff?
I'm still on that platform owned by Elon, or now owned by XAI, whatever it's called, as of this week. No, I'm at Katy John Went on most social media platforms. I also have an at Katy John on X. There's a katyjohn.com website. I'm on all of the social medias. There's a TEDx floating out there. Plenty of interviews elsewhere. And you might find things that I've said 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 5 minutes ago, disagree with what I just said just now, because my thoughts continue to evolve and I change my mind because I think we should be open to changing our mind and open to continued evolution and discussion of what we think.